Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us in this endeavor. Welcome to the first virtual chat in a series sponsored by the Nevada Department of Education through its Digital Engineer Collaborative. The purpose of the collaborative is to provide information and support to Nevada's educators and families during this uncertain time of navigating COVID-19. Parents, students, and teachers have to prepare for likely online learning, whether it be a hybrid model or full-time distance learning. Today, we'll hear from leaders around the state on state policies and how districts are working to implement them, and how families and teachers can best prepare for the opening of schools. I am Jordana Mccudden. I am starting my 21st year in education down in the Clark County School District. I am a project facilitator for the ELL division, and I spent 18 years in the classroom, and I am joined by Maggie Cox.
Hello, my name is Maggie Cox. I was also chosen as part of this Nevada Digital Engineer group, and I am in my 9th year of career and technical education in Clark County School District. I also am very active at Nevada Association of Career Tech Ed as their president this year, and so that's one of my spaces. I'm going to go ahead and read a disclaimer from the Department of Education. Okay. The Nevada Department of Education is providing this event as a public service, and it is provided for informational purposes only. It is not a statement of official state policy, nor should it be construed as legal advice on any subject matter. It is neither a legal interpretation nor a statement of state policy. Reference to any specific product, process, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by the Nevada Department of Education. The views expressed by the guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Views and opinions expressed by the employees of Nevada Department of Education or Nevada educators are those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Nevada Department of Education or the view of the state of Nevada. And we have some very exciting guests for you tonight, and I'm going to start by introducing an educator from Clark County that I met because she taught my son. So Claire Cummings is with us today. She is an elementary coding specialist. She's currently at Dickens Elementary School, and I would like her to tell you a little bit more about what she does.
Hello, I'm glad to be here. So yes, I was, before becoming a coding specialist, which this will be my first year, so we'll see how it goes. I was a gen ed teacher, so I taught mostly 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and I happened to have Hunter in my 3rd grade ELA class over at Lomi G. Hurd Elementary School, and we were a personalized blended learning school, so students are grouped there by their levels, and then they were, I did personalized playlists for learning, so they were working through content digitally on their own, and it was really awesome to see students take ownership of their learning that way. So that's something I'm really excited about in us transitioning to possibly a hybrid model, is that you're going to see a lot more student ownership over their learning. So I'm really excited to see that. And would you like me to talk about things they did in the classroom, or is that later?
I'd like to know what your role is right now as part of the Nevada Digital Engineers, because we all got split into different groups. Could you say what you're working on?
That's right, yes. So I'm in the Professional Learning and Best Practices group. So we're a group that's coming together to create professional development opportunities for teachers. For example, I'm working on a webinar right now actually about those playlists that I just mentioned and how teachers can implement them this year. And so we're creating infographics and all kinds of things to support educators in what does blended learning look like, what are some of the best ways to implement it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. I'm just going to go around the horn and call on you guys to introduce yourselves. Mark, would you?
Hi, I'm Mark Newbern. I'm Vice President of the Nevada State Board of Education. I've been on the State Board for about 8 years. I grew up in Las Vegas. I'm a graduate of the Clark County School District, Rancho High School. I have 2 grandsons who are in the Clark County School District, and that makes They represent the fourth generation of the family to attend the Clark County School District. My father used to be president of the Board of Trustees in the Clark County. The state board, we set state level policy. So typically, after a law is passed, it comes to us to set the basic framework, the what needs to be done, and then that gets handed down to the school districts who then implement it. They get to decide how to do it. And so I have sort of two roles. I'm also very active in the K-12 computer science education community. So I've been on meetings talking about how we're gonna teach that in a blended community while being on the state board, overlooking the 17 different districts from Clark County with 320,000 students to Esmeralda County that has 80 students. So I will say this, opening up our schools again in an effective way during a pandemic may be the hardest thing we've ever done in education in Nevada.
A lot of heads nodding there. Tracy, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, and I remember to take myself off mute, which is always something. So I'm Tracy Edwards. I'm actually, I think our first year of Teach Plus has officially passed. So I was Teach Plus Policy Fellow for this year. So I've been heavily involved in a lot of advocacy around teacher retention, but my background is in educational technology. So I got my degree in it. I've worked as a technology specialist. I've worked as a reading specialist, and currently I work at Odyssey Charter School, which is a blended learning academy, which is why I assumed that I was invited to this conversation, because we've been doing digital learning for a long time. So I'm just excited to share and listen to what everyone has to say.
Fantastic. Thank you. Rebecca?
My name is Rebecca Garcia. I'm the president of the Nevada Parent Teacher Association. I'm a mom of 4, ages 9 to 25. So I've been around the education system for a while. When it comes to blended learning, one of my middle schoolers has already been doing a blended learning curriculum at a magnet program that just converted to that a couple years ago. My second son will be joining him as a 6th grader at the same school. But I've been a big fan of individualized learning for students. Students who are twice exceptional is one of my passions. And then really just focusing on how parents can partner with the education system, because I often see that it's those divides or lack of communication that causes a lot of frustration. And so I think when we build those bridges, we are always more successful. And so I'm excited to be here to be part of that conversation.
Fantastic. And I also, before we really get into the weeds here, would like to acknowledge that many of us have multiple roles within education. So we're educators, we're parents or grandparents, we've got our policy end, you know, and our conversation, feel free to make sure your conversation revolves around all of those entities so that we get a good, well-rounded perspective. So with that, I will throw out my first question, which is from anybody and all of you, whoever wants to jump in. What are some concerns of parents across the state as we begin to embark on the beginning of the school year? And for those of you guys who might know, are there differences between what parents in an urban area might be going through versus rural areas?
I'll jump in. So I think in both of those, there's different answers. So as Nevada PTA, I work with parents and families across the state, and there's definitely different concerns. We have rural areas that have significant connectivity issues. And so there's literally just questions about access, not even a device, but am I going to have connectivity to log in and be able to access the streaming portions of things, especially, are a big concern. And then I think for parents across the state, there's really big concerns about our level of knowledge. And, you know, I consider myself a pretty techie parent. And I have to say, when spring hit and I was trying to work from home virtually, my husband was working from home virtually and trying to help 3 kids, including a 3rd grader who digital learning was new to, it was incredibly overwhelming. And I was like, where is this supposed to be? And which classroom am I supposed to be in for Google Classroom? And so then if you add the level for a parent who doesn't even have a computer in their home, their only device may be a smartphone, or doesn't speak English as their first language, or has some other sort of disability or disadvantage, or their child does, it just like stacks those challenges on top of each other. And so I think, while some challenges are universal, there's others that become very personal based on people's family circumstances.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in. I know that, you know, some parents are concerned when we suddenly went to a distance education model. They didn't really feel ready. They weren't really prepared, because as you move away from the in-class to the distance education, the teacher starts to become a little less important. The parent starts to become really, really important and can become the primary educational coach. And a lot of parents just didn't feel prepared to take on that role, because now they're responsible at times for even introducing the educational material. And I think we just saw cases where, since they weren't grading the material, they just gave up. And so I think parents are concerned that they're going to be resources to help them be ready to support those kids, because there's a big difference between your blended model being, 2 days of school in class and 2 days remote, versus a blended model which is 2 days in class and the kid just really gets a 5-day weekend. So I think, making sure that they're going to get the support and encouragement that they need, that a lot of times they didn't necessarily get when we suddenly went to distance education.
Mark, I'd really agree with you that the experience in the spring has a lot of people apprehensive. And I recognize that was crisis, that was urgent, that was not planned, like, Tracy and Claire, who've been digital teachers, that was not the playbook that, and I definitely saw a huge difference between my kid who already was doing blended learning. That school transitioned very easily versus other schools that didn't. But I do think that there's we need to acknowledge that people are viewing this through the lens of what happened 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
Tracy, can you pipe in too? Because I remember having a conversation with you early on, and you're like, oh, well, everything's the same for us. Like, it was a very fluid transition at Odyssey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's because we were already blended. So we start our school year heavily engaging our parents. They understand that their role is as a coach and almost a tutor, and pretty much the child's other teacher. And so we have a lot of conversations with them. We introduce the tools to them. We talk about our philosophy. We talk about everything from study habits to setting up a place in your home where your child can study. So having that kind of foundation was what saved us, because when we all of a sudden didn't see kids at all, there wasn't a huge change in, at least for my grade level. And I can't speak to every single person in the school, but for the most part, the kids they had access to all of the curriculum. They still had access to us. It was still pretty consistent. They were still showing up to meetings, even though those were now virtual. It was just more seamless, but we planned for it in that manner. So as school districts start to transition into blended learning, I really think we have to be very intentional about the messaging to our parents and our families, because if they don't understand that you are going to, or someone needs to play a larger role in the home, because now you have children who we're assuming are digital natives, and often that just means they know how to turn on the computer and go to YouTube and go to Instagram. It does not mean they know how to convert a PDF file and use Google Classroom and all the things that we're really expecting them to do. It's very, very different. And all those conversations need to happen before we get the kids in school, if at all possible, or at least the first couple of weeks. Really, the parent and the child should probably be in on those sessions together, would be my suggestion.
That's a really great point. I actually had the same concern just this week, because a lot of parents are saying, I want to homeschool my kid. I don't want them to do this hybrid. And a lot of people are saying, wait, there is cohort C. There is this other option in Clark County. And it's scaring me because they haven't even gotten that message that there's an option for them. And that's really scary, that the communication is already broken down and they think that they have to do it all. And we're saying, no, we're going to provide you a licensed teacher and the instruction, and they're not hearing that. So we have this, and it is a massive district. That's the big challenge. How do we reach everyone and tell them, here are your options, and here's what it's going to look like. And then as a parent, I have a 2.5-year-old who has been receiving Nevada early intervention services since he was born. And those cut off at 3 and he goes to pre-K. And so then I have the pre-K questions. What is pre-K going to look like? Is 2 days a week going to be enough for him to continue his services and therapies? So yeah, as parents, communication is it. That's totally where we need to go. And we just have to figure out how to do that effectively.
Well, and I would say that's not unique to CCSD, because I'm hearing the same thing from parents in other places, and some have released their plans, and some everybody's doing something a little different, So some are using keeping kids who are doing digital only within their school of record, whereas others are creating or using an already existing digital school within the district to funnel those kids there. So I think it's those communications, because there's so much change. It's not just like a little bit. It's so much that it's hard to unpack all of those different changes and ensure you understand it. Because I do think there's been a massive confusion between homeschool versus online learning. And there are a lot of people, I was actually homeschooled as a kid, but people don't understand the difference between those two learning models. And I do think that should be more readily communicated, because like Tracy said, even if you're choosing online, or we have to go all online, which is highly possible in the environment we're in, it changes your role as a parent in a way. I mean, obviously I've always believed I was my child's first teacher, but the support that I'm required to do on a regular basis changes. And so how we communicate that and ensuring it's reaching all families, not just mass emails or phone calls, really is important.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Rebecca, because I've heard you several times reiterate that what we saw in the spring was not, online learning. We were really teaching in a crisis, and I saw educators go above and beyond, but it really was difficult. So what we're looking at now, and this was really Joan Ebert's vision, was to create these Nevada digital engineers that would bring that message. So creating the content, bringing the message to the parents, to the teachers, to help facilitate that. So I think we're moving in the right direction, and I'm excited about this project. I'm going to go ahead and read the next question. What does a typical day or week look like for a hybrid learning, either as a student, what might it look like, or what might it look like for a family with several students? Can you guys weigh in on that?
I don't know if you guys want me to start what it looks like at Odyssey.
Yes.
Because well, so for the past couple years, our students literally only attended class once a week. So they had 1 day a week where they saw me, and I saw a different group of kids every single day, and the rest of their support was online, unless they were SPED or some of our RTI students. Those kids had more contact, but for their general whole class learning, that was in front of a teacher once a week. Our lessons have to be online. I would highly suggest recording them so they can access them. I'm not sure what the plan is for CCSD, but the whole idea of making kids sit in front of a live lesson every single day, I think that's going to be a little bit of a disaster, because you need the flexibility, especially during something like COVID-19, where you have parents that are sick and daycare is shifting and so many things are changing. Making those lessons accessible 24/7 is going to be where you get the most bang out of your buck. At least that's what we do at Odyssey. Most of our instruction, tier 1, it happens online. What we do in front of us is more of a flip. You are practicing what we've already taught you at home with your parent. And then when you show up in front of me, now that we've talked about I'm ELA, we talked about main idea last week. So now that when I see you, we're going to talk about that together as a group. Maybe it's a game, maybe it's an interactive activity, but the tier 1 instruction is always, always, always online across every subject area.
So Tracy, then what does that look like at home? Will students, or do they do better if we've, as teachers, given them schedules to follow or a timeline to follow? Like how can, and you work with 5th grade, right? Like how do you help them manage their time when we're so used to school being seat time where the teacher dictates every minute? How can we help support kids when, and families really, when they now have to learn how to manage time in a totally different way?
I think the scheduling is day, like for 5th grade, I give them a schedule for everything that needs to be done for that week. But that's just how I choose to do it. So you may have a writing prompt, there may be something else you're doing, but it is due, it's 1 week from the day that I assign it. Typically everything is in there, you have a week cutoff, but we're pretty flexible because they're online. We're gonna have to change our mindset a little bit about hard deadlines as well. The lower grades actually give the kids a daily schedule. It works better for them, for mom or dad or whoever's at home to see what needs to be done on Monday, what needs to be done on Tuesday, what needs to be done on Wednesday. So there definitely need to be schedules and expectations around things when they're due. And you can't get around. It will be confusing at first because it's online and you're going to have families that miss deadlines for whatever reason, but you still need to start with them. That gives you a place to start and just be a little bit flexible, especially in the beginning, because it's going to throw a lot of people for a loop. Even if it's just blended, it's just going to feel very different than seeing kids every day and saying, you didn't do that assignment yesterday and it was due tomorrow, so now I want you up here tomorrow. It's just different. You have to really rely on the engagement in the families and the schedules that they set to make sure that the work is done. And that's the biggest philosophical shift, I think.
I think that's a really good point because that's one of the key things I've heard from feedback from families and even myself. One day I got 52 Infinite Campus messages for my 3 kids. And I already get quite a bit in email a day. And so adding that was like, I'm done. And so repeatedly there has been the request, like, we want to see that. We want to see us, I'm using college terms, but we want to see a syllabus. What's due when? Because if I'm tracking for multiple kids, I need to be able to understand what their projects are and how to help manage their deadlines. Especially I have children with ADHD and executive function disorder. And so that isn't something they're going to self-regulate. And so I have to, and especially if their teacher's online, that's going to be even harder. So it's going to fall on me. And I think that's really important. The other thing I would point out, and I love all of you educators, you are amazing and I admire you, but we've got to pay attention to our language choices. We are constantly using acronyms that are not understandable and translatable to families. And I think when we remove that face-to-face communication, that's going to become even more challenging. Even like, I know my sister, who's a teacher, asked me if we were allowed to do synchronous or asynchronous teaching. And I actually went and looked it up because I know what the terms mean, but I went like, what does that mean in education? So I think that is it. Like you said, mindset shifts. I've always been loudmouth about the terms, but I think with digital, it's even more important because we won't have that face-to-face connection.
I think I'm just going to piggyback on that. That is probably one of the early lessons I learned at Odyssey. Using the acronyms and too much jargon is a way that you will keep your parents confused and really, really frustrated with you. So we have to just get away from all of that. If you mean live class, just say that. Don't say, just say what it is. Like, I don't know why educators go down these rabbit holes, but they are not helping us and they definitely won't help us going forward.
I agree with you, Tracy, as far as getting away from the idea of the live. And I think the flexibility, but also allowing kids to go at their own pace. I think that's really important, is that sometimes, so now if we just transfer the whole group lesson online, it's that same feeling of I've lost half of you because I'm going too fast or I'm going too slow. And so that was the beauty of going to playlists or online modules for me, was that I'm not losing anyone. They're going at the pace they need. They're finishing the assignments at the pace they need. And I'm there to support and whatever. So if I were in the gen ed classroom and doing this hybrid, that's how I would do it, is I would put the units online and they're working through at their own pace, whether they're home or they're in front of me. And so when they're in front of me, I'm able to give them that one-on-one feedback. Maybe I can extend it a little more with a little small group, or I could give them that attention that they need, that they're not getting from me online. So that's what I would see as far as a hybrid model. Now, I don't know if that's going to be a site-based decision or not. I use a jargon, a school-based decision or not. But I really do think it's going to take a lot of shifting from what we know of school for many, many, many years and what we know it probably should move toward.
Yeah, I guess I'll say that that's the promise of blended learning, is that it can be much more customizable for the students. The students get to work on their own pace. They don't feel rushed if they need more time, and they don't feel held back if they're moving more advanced. So I think that's the good end. I think for a little while, part of the day for teachers when they're back in class is assessing what the students really did when they weren't there. If you look at really top line distance education delivery curriculum for especially elementary schools, there's always these little assessments. So the teacher, even though they're not face to face with the student, they're able to kind of keep track of how that student is doing. Whether they appear to be learning the material. So if they're asynchronous, they're still sort of keeping their finger on the pulse like an in-class teacher would. And I think for us, as we learn the system, some of it is going to be learning how to do that. The teachers, once the kids have been gone for 5 days and they're back in my class, do I have a sense that they did anything? And so I think that's going to be a learning process for the whole state, as to how to sort of keep a good sense of what's happening, because then you're going to have to adjust your in-class lessons based on, well, I don't think this third of the kids did anything, and this other third of the kids, they're already ahead into the lesson, which is some of the promise, but you want a 5-day education system, not a 2-day education system.
Yeah, I definitely think that one of the biggest slowdowns could actually be teachers, just us having to rethink what is seat time, what is the value of seat time, when I can't see the kids working on something, how do I know? And just really learning to trust in the system and being able to take whatever assessments, formative or summative, you put online, and really looking at that information so that when they're in front of you, you're prepared to, have those differentiated discussions like you were just saying, Mark. I mean, it takes a shift for teachers in order to make it happen. But I agree that there's definitely so much positive that can come out of this, that it's exciting to think that we might actually be able to, shift things in education. And along those lines, Tracy, I'm going to ask you specifically, but again, everybody feel free to jump in. Tracy and I took a course together on blended learning. And the very first thing that we spent a whole day on was building a community that we know in person as a classroom teacher. We know that. That's why we spend in elementary, you'll spend a whole day doing the getting to know you icebreaker activities. And we know the value of that, but that value is just as important, if not more important, when developing your online curriculum. So Tracy, can you talk a bit about that from the teacher perspective, but then again, to help parents kind of understand really making sure they jump in with both feet, and how can they support their student in feeling like they are part of a community when it's sitting behind a computer screen?
I would actually say it's more important in a digital space to set that community, because you don't have the face-to-face that you normally have. So typically I spend the first few weeks and it's all community building. And now I'm sneaking in skills as well. So I may ask you to give me a short sentence or even a picture about something that's important to you, your culture, your family, your home, your pets. all those things. And I share a lot about myself. So, and that's more for parents and students, because I think honestly, for me, Odyssey was my first blended school. So it was very difficult at first. I didn't understand that that shift had to be made. So I jumped into my first year just right into curriculum. Okay, it's day one. We need to learn about main idea, and I'm going to give you this writing assessment. And boy, did that backfire! It backfired. I had to slow it down 2 months in and dial it back and make sure that my parents knew me. So I just dialed back a bit and started doing cute little videos. And this is the other thing. If teachers aren't really comfortable with the technology, the nice thing about it is you can put simple things up like a picture prompt. You can ask kids about themselves. You can do little things to make sure the kids are engaged while you're learning technology, while the families are learning the technology. So it kind of helps both of you to start really slowly with just some getting to know you and building community. It's so valuable. It's really, really tempting, especially after we shut down in March and everyone is worried about the slump, to just jump back in and start assessing kids and let's just get them back on track. We need to make sure that we know who we're talking to, and they need to be assured that we understand what's going on in their homes, even if we don't, that is at least a safe space and that there's some flexibility. That is going to be so important, because if you don't do that, you're going to lose them really, really quickly. So all those wonderful lessons that you have planned won't matter because they won't log on. They won't feel a need to be a part of your community. They won't feel a need to make the teacher happy or whatever the drive is. The engagement and the community building has to be really, really, just really, I can't stress how much this is important. Walk in digitally, week 1, week 2, even week 3, and make a lot of it about what your digital classroom will look like, because it's exactly the same as your physical classroom, but it's going to be harder and it's going to take longer. So just understand that, and parents, just understand that we want you to jump in. When we say ask your mom what her favorite color is, go ahead and respond. Post a picture, be a part of the community, because we need you that much. We need you to get in there and be able to post and understand when we're asking kids to do certain things, that you understand how to upload the assignments and you understand these different terms, because if you don't understand it, you're the ones that with them. So it's going to be hard if we don't train the parents as we train the students. So you're kind of doing 2 things at once. Actually, you are. It's not even kind of, you are. So.
I would jump in on that. I 100% agree. Relationships are the key, especially I have a child who's a really struggling learner, and quite frankly, online has been an utter disaster for her. It doesn't match her learning style. It doesn't match her interests. It is just a train wreck. There's no other, I'm just going to be quite honest. And the only that kept her going was her relationship with her teachers. That was the only thing that made her want to even log into a device. And so that's the thing I'm most concerned about as we go back, is whether or not she's going to get assigned a teacher that she will care, that they will have that connection, and that will keep her at least being willing to try. But the one thing I guess I would point out though too is that I would hope teachers especially are mindful of families with multiple kids. I'm going to be looking at, between specialists and classroom teachers and secondary teachers, I'm going to be looking at communicating with 20 teachers. Easy. That's even if they just do 4 classes in middle school. And so I think sometimes the expectation of families from educators doesn't acknowledge the number of people that we're being asked to communicate and keep up with. And while I appreciate personalization, I'm a magnet mom, so obviously I do, I also really struggle sometimes when it's just so divergent that I have no idea why one kid and 2 kids in the same school are on like way different systems and processes. And as a parent, that becomes incredibly frustrating. So I think part of that community building is setting those expectations and recognizing, maybe learning which of your parents and families have, single parent, or it's a older sibling raising a child, or shift workers, or just all the different family dynamics, so that you're more understanding as an educator of what that family's bringing from a logistics standpoint too.
So I experienced this as a parent with a 4th grader and a kindergartner at 2 different elementary schools. So when we had the shutdown, the amount of communication on multiple platforms was very difficult. So, you know, as we mentioned before, I think streamlining the communication methods is going to be critical. Building those relationships right off the bat, trying to learn, you know, how does this teacher communicate, which programs. I think it would really be helpful if teachers were very clear about which programs they will be using. I had a bulletin board with logins. I think my kindergartner had like 6 different logins. You know, it was a lot to try to do, and I'm pretty tech savvy myself, but it was a lot to do. And I'm a high school teacher at a Title I school, so most of my students were now taking siblings. So they would jump on a live lesson with me, say, sorry, miss, I'm gonna have to jump off and help my sister who's sitting at the same table trying to do another lesson. So I think really acknowledging that we do have multiple kids in a household. We may have, you know, younger kids helping each other, and having teachers really be mindful and empathetic to that will be very helpful.
Maggie, that's a great segue into our next question. Do you want to go ahead and read it?
Yes. So next question, I want to direct a little bit to Miss Claire Cummings, because as I said, I had an experience where my son was in her class. Thank goodness he picked up some digital skills because my kindergartner had none. So one day I walked into their class at the end of the day, and all the students were very excitedly changing the screensavers on their Chromebooks in class. And they were all showing me different pictures and what they were doing. And I thought, wow, that is so cute. And I, you know, come to find out it was kind of a treat at the end of the day, good behavior or something they'd done. So I thought that was great. And after quarantine, first purchase I made, got my son a new Chromebook. And he got on right away, set that screensaver, because that had become a digital skill that he'd picked up. And, you know, that was what he was looking forward to. And so I was grateful for that. And the question that we had was, you know, what can parents do to help support their student learning? And I was grateful that my son had that skill because it made him excited to turn on the Chromebook when nothing else was going to do it. So maybe you could share a little bit about some skills that you could, you know, help teach the kids.
Yeah, I think that's another shift I had to make of, you know, oh, don't touch the screensaver, don't change your icon. All that personalization makes the buy-in more real for them, and they love it. This is now their computer, you know, and it's easy to wipe it off later, you know, and reset it. So I really let go of that and allowed them to have that creativity. So I think that's the first thing, is let them do those things that might seem just like a distraction, because to them it's just kind of a motivator, or it makes it this is my computer. So I would say that's first and foremost, let them personalize it and do those things. I also, for the first couple weeks, we really don't do much in the different sites or assignments, and this might be for teachers as well, but the same for parents. We do a lot of just walking around with a computer. What is it like to transport this device that's very expensive that your parents bought from one location to the other, not throwing it or watching where you're walking? So we play music, and for a minute they rotate around and just hold it with 2 hands. We even practice opening it, because they can open it, it flips up, it's just a whole thing. And it seems like, what, you would spend that time on it, but it pays dividends, because then these devices will last the rest of the year. I mean, there's even things like kids are very heavy-handed when they type. I mean, there's just all these little things that then become a problem later, because half their keyboard is gone because they were pressing too hard. So I would say, you know, before even worrying about the tech, think of the device as something that you can help them care for, like they would a kitten or something, you know, fragile or precious in their house. How do you care for this device so that it'll last you a couple years? So that would be one, is spend time with the device and letting them own it, but also care for it. The other skill I think that is really a good thing to start them on early is kind of online commenting and conversations. And if they're comfortable, that's something that the teacher will have them do in a closed atmosphere. But you could also have your students, after they finish reading a book, go on Goodreads and review it, set up their own Goodreads account and learn to put their, opinions out on the web and have people respond to it, or maybe even Google reviews. They go review their favorite restaurant or their favorite indoor playground, and comment on someone else's. And so you're teaching them that digital citizenship, because that's another thing I do see happen sometimes, is if you don't teach them that, and they could be very kind to each other on the playground, but for some reason, it becomes a different thing, right? We all know from our Twitter accounts and things. So it's really good to try to teach them that and have the parent involved in that. Oh, you're on YouTube and you're making comments to someone's video. Let's talk about how it could be a kind comment or a productive criticism, So I think there's areas where parents could help support us in that area, because I would probably guarantee they're commenting now, especially the older kids, they're commenting on Steam, or they're commenting on Amazon or something. So it's like just helping them understand, what does that conversation look like that's productive.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump, and Maggie, I know you follow me, so I'm jumping around a little bit to the bottom question. And this is for anybody who wants to jump in, of course. I have a feeling Mark and Rebecca are probably uniquely in tuned with all the policies and what have you, and I'm hoping you guys are following around what's happening with the nation. So the question is, what else is happening with schools around the country that we could be using as examples for how we are reopening in Nevada? So like we've heard a lot from Tracy, who's been teaching in a blended model at a charter school, but there are probably models around the country as states are looking to reopen. And I'm wondering if you guys have heard of any that have some really interesting ideas that maybe we could be pushing for, or just thinking about, even just personally, how we could take that idea into our own home and help support our students. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about that.
Well, I'll throw a couple comments in. I mean, of course, recently we've heard that LA Unified and the San Diego School District are going to stay distant through the fall. So that wasn't particularly encouraging. And I think we do struggle a little bit in Nevada, especially in Clark County, because the schools tend to be big and overcrowded, which limits some of your options. I will say is, if we do, the better we get at the distance model. One of my grandsons, it was his senior year last year on an online charter, and he was not affected at all. Okay, I mean the pandemic had zero impact on his education. He was just able to carry on. So the takeaway I got there is that since it is an uncertain time right now, that if we get, the better we get at educating the kids when they're not in front of the teachers, the more flexibility we're going to have in dealing with the uncertainty, because it's just not clear right now whether things are getting better or they're getting worse, whether we're going to be full-time in class or we're going to be full-time distance education. I mean, some of the foreign schools have opened up, and they've been able to spread out enough, and they seem to be doing okay, but they're also in communities that don't have the same sort of infection rates as we're seeing in the United States. So I think everybody in the world is basically waiting to see what everybody else in the world is doing to solve this.
I would agree with a lot of that. I do get the opportunity to regularly communicate with there's actually 54 presidents of the PTA congresses, which include the DoD schools in Europe, Puerto Rico, Guam. So really a diverse group of presidents, some of which are educators and some are parents. And I would say that we're all navigating the same waters with varying degrees of success. I was just on a call last week where everybody was reporting out what was happening in their state with our national president, and there was those constant themes, you know, are we going to open? Are we not? And obviously this week we've seen a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but we have seen several large or prominent districts pivot to already saying they're going to do online only, as well as some unions. And actually even Maryland PTA joined with the union yesterday to call for online only in that state. But I think one of the big things that I'm seeing is, and one of the challenges, I think there is a great opportunity, and we've highlighted some of those opportunities in this conversation, but where I feel like we haven't come to success and where the policy and the implementation need to pick up is for our special education and our diverse learners. A lot of the things we've talked about work really well for general education students or students who feel comfortable in an online environment. And some students actually do better. I mean, the parents said that, you know, my kid did better online, self-paced, doing their thing. But there is a real segment of our student population that online learning is a massive obstacle for different reasons. And I feel like that's where those parents I hear from the most. And I feel like that's where we have the least answers. Of how we're going to effectively deliver, how we're going to effectively fulfill individual education plans and meet 504 accommodations. There's a lot of we're going to do it, but not how. And that's very disconcerting for families. And that's not unique to Nevada. That's happening everywhere that I'm hearing. But I feel like that we can't, like Mark's comment, I do think this is an opportunity for progress, but I feel like when it comes to special education services, I feel like we're backsliding, and that really concerns me.
And Rebecca, you haven't heard from your peers in the PTA across the country any great ideas, any nuggets of wisdom about how they're handling it? I mean, we're really having the same issues here in Nevada that, you know, I mean, nobody's got any answer. It's so scary.
You know, the one thing that I had found is that it seems like the districts who have invested the time, I have a friend who in California, her district shut down for 2 weeks. We closed on the same day, and their district had no students in class for 2 weeks, and they did all teacher education during that time, professional development. And then they pushed out resources to families in kind of a testing phase for a couple days before they launched with families. And I've heard now several schools are looking at more of that model, and that I think is probably the one good success that I think we can't expect people to make this transition without support and resources. It's just not going to happen. And that's families, that's students, and that's educators. But where we are, the challenge in Nevada is that we're starved for funding. And so the idea of, you know, the Department of Education allowed for additional professional development this coming year, which is fabulous. And I loved seeing that. But, you know, districts are, you know, all of you know this, educators, you're already handling too many students. You're already not have enough resources. And so that idea of slowing down, giving more time to preparation and giving more time becomes really hard. And that's maybe where the state board, you know, I'm hoping that there will be an emphasis more on, we need to focus on standards, but maybe more flexibility on that time, so to speak, as we move into a new environment. Maybe we need to look at some of those old standards that were based on in-person school, and maybe they don't work the same way if we're looking at a digital environment.
Mark, do you know, I know that Superintendent Ebert has granted everybody 10 professional development days. I know down here in Clark County, the very first 2 weeks of the school year will be with no students, so teachers can have a really intensive professional development opportunity. And I'm hoping that we get, you know, lots of not just online, but, you know, how to work with our EL students, how to work with our special ed and 504 students. Mark, do you know across the state, are other districts taking those days that are being allowed and doing something similar as Clark?
I don't actually know. I haven't heard of anybody who's doing the same sort of delayed start. I don't know that anybody else is doing that as opposed to fitting those development days in. I can find that out.
So Washoe's doing some, several are doing some. I haven't heard the full 10 days like Clark is, but Washoe, Nye announced today their reopening plans, and they have more PD built in at the beginning. But I haven't heard any that's the full 10 days like Clark, but at the beginning. But I have several are front loaded.
Yeah, I thought I heard that Washoe, maybe Rebecca can correct me, that they're trying to balance out the holidays because they're more on Monday. They're looking at using development days to try to balance out when kids are in school, because they, their cohort might always get that vacation off and miss a whole bunch of extra days. So I've heard some of them looking at using that just to make the schedule make more sense.
Tracy, do you want to jump in? I see it in chat. Talk about how Odyssey handles IEPs. You're on mute, honey. It has to happen once every meeting. It's okay.
I was so good this time. So for the last couple of years, our IEP meetings are face-to-face. They meet with the team, the families come in. During the shutdown, they were all virtual though, every single one, and they had 100% completion rate. But again, I think that's because those relationships with those families, it was already there. So it wasn't unusual for a teacher to call you up or want to chat you up and say, hey, can we do this today? Because actually a couple times we were at IEP meetings and something happened with families. So some of them occurred virtually just because scheduling things happened during the school year. So it really wasn't that unusual. They just all had to be done via Google Meet instead of being done face-to-face. Yeah, but the relationships, again, they have to know and respond to your phone calls and your emails, or you won't have them. And that's just the reality. It goes back to setting that in stone at the beginning, before you do anything else, honestly.
Can I follow up on the communities?
Sure.
Because I'm going to give the opposite case of what happens if you don't have a digital community. Because one of my grandsons, in an upper middle class neighborhood, these kids were already had online assignments. They were in Google Classroom, but they didn't have the community. There was no sense of a digital community. So pretty quickly when school shut down, out of 30 kids, only 5 of those kids were showing up for the teacher meetings. Okay, they had lost that sense of community. And basically, except for 5 kids, the rest of the kids were, playing Fortnite video game or something. They had, so I really like what Tracy's saying, because if you don't have that sense, you have the classroom sense of community, but if you lose that online, I mean, the kids just disappear.
Yeah, that initial week of shutdown, Odyssey was still, we basically told parents that we were still there for them, right? So even though the kids didn't technically have to do work, and the amount of emails that I got from kids and families who were just, what's going to happen next? There's nothing in there this week, because we had a week there was no content that was due while we were all transitioning. And they were checking to make sure they hadn't missed anything. Usually you put the schedule up. Like, that's how important those routines and those relationships became, because they were actually reaching out saying, why isn't there work in there? You always put work in there on Sunday. It's always in there Sunday by 3 o'clock. They know me that well. So gotta have it.
So believe it or not, time flies when we're having such great conversations, but that's been about an hour. So we're gonna wrap it up here. I just wanna thank everybody for lending us your time and your expertise as we learn to navigate all these new normals through COVID. Please know that you can access the resources being provided by the digital engineers through a link on the Nevada Department of Education's website. There will be virtual chats like this. Maggie's got a podcast coming up, and that'll be a monthly podcast as well. There's infographics, there's lessons, there's all kinds of resources. So please check that out regularly. And thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us.